Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Émilie Girard, President of ICOM France, and its Director, Anne-Claude Maurice, with whom we have been partners for 6 years for this cycle of conferences and ethics debates. My thanks also go to the GrandPalaisRmn for hosting us today. I would also like to thank Charles Personnaz, Director of the Institut National du Patrimoine, and Séverine Blenner-Michel, Director of Studies in the Curators Department at the INP, who unfortunately could not join us tonight. We are very pleased to participate in the organization of this series of evening ethics debates with ICOM France. For 6 years now, we have been striving to offer debates on ethical principles within museums. During a previous session in 2021, we discussed the artistic and scientific research missions of museums. At the INP, we also train professionals in the restoration and conservation of artworks, whose study and research missions are regularly highlighted and encouraged. Among the various ways to disseminate scientific content, publications remain a preferred medium. In fact, these evenings lead to publications, which you may have discovered at the entrance of the auditorium, of which we now have a very fine collection. It seems essential to us to preserve the memory of these discussions, which nourish the reflections of museum professionals and beyond. It is a matter of transmitting knowledge and promoting intellectual and scientific production within the institutions we support. This question of whether or not to publish has also been a major focus for us at the INP in recent years, regarding our scientific programming, the teaching, and the research projects we have developed in the humanities, social sciences, and experimental sciences over the past few years are widely shared. We publish an annual journal, maintain an online research blog to disseminate our students' work, and are launching new editorial projects dedicated to the conservation and restoration practices of objects.
Institutions are a key tool. Exhibitions, catalogues, proceedings of meetings, scientific publications in specialist reviews are just a few of the diverse publications that are published by museums. And you can see an example of this on the table in front of our various speakers and guests. Various publications are made in different formats, targeting different audiences. Amongst all of this diversity, the questions of the publishing and editorial policy needs to be asked and updated again and again. We share our experiences with other scientific publishing houses because publishing the results of results and discussing contemporary issues is an obvious thing, but there are a number of questions. Should everything be published? What's the most important format, on paper or in digital format? What's the relevance in a very rich publishing ecosystem? And how can we address these questions? We're going to think about how these questions are addressed in the museum field. I want to thank the various guests who've come to share their expertise and experience with us, and they're going to discuss some of these current issues around publishing from museums. So I'm going to hand the floor to you, and I hope you have a very fruitful and enlightening debate. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Grand Palais, this place where art and culture is reinvented. It's also a place of culture and art. I want to welcome all of the people who are taking part in this evening. Émilie, Girard and Claude Maurice. We're delighted at the Grand Palais to host this meeting. I want to thank the different speakers who are going to shed light on the contemporary issues in publishing. And thank you again to Dominique de Font-Réaulx, who is going to be our moderator for the evening. This issue is at the heart of what we do at the Grand Palais, publishing. It's at the heart of our mission with our own publishing house. We've got a very wide range of publishing for different audiences, audience guides, written books, and we also have young people's books, and we also publish a catalogue in different formats. This issue is at the heart of our mission in our role as booksellers, because we have 37 bookshops at the Grand Palais, and we present new works as well as works that are connected in with the latest news for each museum. This is an issue that is relevant to the Grand Palais because the exhibition of books and publishing is taking place here in April. There are a number of issues that we're going to be able to talk about tonight: innovation, diversification, audience, and sustainability of the field. I think these subjects will be part of our discussions, and I'm delighted to hear the different discussions that are going to take place this evening. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be with you today for this new edition of our ethics discussion evenings. I want to thank our hosts at the Grand Palais who've agreed to host the event. I want to also mention not only Nathalie Blanc-Guelpa, but also Christophe Chauffour, Deputy Director General, Sophie Radix from the Arctics Programming and Production Department, and Antoine Renoir, who's up in the control room. I want to thank Émilie Maume for speaking to welcome us on behalf of the INP. Let's talk about the subject of the evening. This has been a topic that's been on our minds within ICOM France for some time already, and a quick search in our archives showed us that this issue of museum-related publishing had not been addressed recently. And so the invitation that we'd received from GrandPalaisRmn gave us an opportunity to take hold of this issue and make it the subject of our ethics debate evening. It's a subject that hasn't been discussed much by ICOM, but it's not an ancillary mission of museums. Publishing is one of the essential pieces of work, and the issues at stake are linked to the ethical questions that bring us together for these events. Promoting scientific research carried out on collections, disseminating knowledge to the public, preserving the record of the evolution of knowledge and the way collections are read. These are all fundamental missions that are at the heart of the act of publication. Nonetheless, publishing has evolved considerably in recent years. The changes that have affected the world of museums as a whole, and which we regularly discuss between us, are aimed to diversify our audiences, the quest for inclusivity, the quest for sustainability, financial challenges, and the greater consideration of societal issues have obviously not spared the publication sector. The publication of printed catalogues is a less and less reality. There are fewer and fewer conference proceedings. Exhibition catalogues are seeing their forms evolve. Digital editions are raising questions in this area. But beyond the formats, there are questions regarding the content and the substance. What kind of level of scientific rigour should be sought in museum publications? Should we still offer reference work, or should we adapt to an event-driven form of publishing? What importance is given to the knowledge and dissemination of permanent exhibitions? Defining an editorial policy, therefore, has a strong ethical dimension covering several areas. Firstly, the question of target audience. What audiences are we aiming for, and how can we dream up products that meet their expectations? Then sustainability. How can we evolve to better meet environmental, financial and societal challenges? Finally, governance. Who is directing the editorial policy in a field when the question of distribution, pricing and marketing are all major issues? Before I give them the floor, I'd like to thank all of our speakers this evening. Our panel is made up of female speakers tonight exclusively. They're going to share with us their experience. I want to thank Dominique de Font-Réaulx, who's going to moderate this evening's discussion on a topic that is close to her heart. I think it's fair to say. And I just want to take this opportunity to send my warmest regards to the ICOM team, which you know, as usual, our delegate Anne-Claude Maurice, Léane Copin, who is assisting her, also Julie Bertuis, who is at the entrance. Thank you again to the Scientific Committee of ICOM France, who have contributed to the preparation of this evening. Dominique, I'm going to hand you the floor, and I wish you all excellent and most profitable evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you for those warm words of welcome. Thank you very much to GrandPalaisRmn for hosting us for this evening. And I'm delighted to be here in this auditorium. I knew it in the past in its former glories, but now it's been updated and there's a new sound system which is working very well this evening. I also want to tell you how happy I am to be here with you for this ICOM France discussion evening for this subject, which is very close to my heart, which I think a lot of you think is very important for the life of our museums. And I'm delighted to introduce you to the various speakers tonight. One of them is online with us, and she will be speaking to us via Zoom. One key point has been highlighted already by Émilie and Nathalie in their opening speeches. Publishing is a crucial issue for museums. This is something that is part of museums' cultural policies in general. There's generally part of the cultural department of a museum or a similarly titled department. And this is something that is an essential founding act within the museums. Published writings were parts of museums from the earliest days, even from the days of the Central Museum of Arts, the museum that became the museum, became the Louvre Museum at the back end of the 18th century and in the early 19th century. Publishing was a really key part of the activity. It's about elaborating scientific thought and academic thought within a museum context, and I think it's really important to think of museum publishing in this kind of long-term perspective, which with a history that goes back over 2 centuries. The oldest amongst us, and I include myself in that, will remember that 10, 15 years ago people were saying books are dead. We had conferences to say this. I avoided all of these conferences because it's not what I thought, but people used to say the books were dead, publishing is dead, digital technology is the future and everything is going to be done on digital technology, and books were somehow excluded. The good news is, maybe it's not lasting, but that the book as an object still is doing well. And I've got some speakers around me who have published some lovely books. So books as a physical format still exist, and we can be very pleased to hear that. I think it's an important thing to say, because publishing is about making an object, making an item. Many of you around the room are very attached to that, and I do. As you will know, in France, the Lang Act has put pricing protections around books and publishing, and that has enabled bookshops to thrive. And there is some competition around such thing, but in fine arts and museum publishing, the market share for public sector publishers such as us, or co-edition, co-publishing initiatives, generally, whether we are private or public sector organisations, we have co-publishing initiatives. But there's a major commitment there, and we in the public sector have a major weight within the fine art publishing sector. Despite that, and those are things that we can't get away from, but there are still recurring questions about the place of publishing within books, when you think about the organisation chart of a museum, you often find publishing quite low down in the organisation charts. It's quite interesting to look at those charts in any case. But you can see it's, as I said, in the organisation chart. So it's always tempting to say that publishing has a cost. So we'll try and make savings. It's not a major cost, but one book more or less, what does it matter? And the issue is that we often confuse the timescales. Books, like museums, are something that fit in on a long time scale. I talked about the earliest publishing by the Louvre in 1810, or that kind of decades. We can still read that book. So it's existed over the time, even though we wouldn't know what exhibitions were on in the Louvre at the time. So that's important. So books are about the longer timescales that museums can fit in with. But we should not hide the fact that although publishing is an important part of scientific and academic policies, but they also represent cost centres and profit centres. Sometimes a book will sell very well, it can make money, and we can generate some income for a new museum. The final point that I wanted to raise, and the fact that you're all here shows is the broadening of the published offering. A few decades ago, what did museums publish? Catalogues for temporary exhibitions, summary catalogues for the permanent exhibitions, and some guides. That was probably true 40 years ago still. When I said a few years, a few decades, it's not that long ago. But these days, and over the last 40 years, there's been greater and greater number of different types of publishing initiatives. There are reviews that are published, magazines. I think that's a good thing. Children's books are published, and I think that's a very interesting initiative. Comic strips are published, albums are published, recurring collections are published. I've got something in my book pile, which I'll get out a little bit, that was published by the Strasbourg Museum. It's a regular review, and I'm sure we'll hear about it a bit later on in the evening. We sometimes publish literary texts, even novels, or things very like novels. And I think all of that is very interesting to think about, because it bears witness to the diversity and creativity. But it does raise a question. Is it up to the public authorities and its representatives to publish all of these different types of works? These diverse range of publications do enable us to reach an increasingly diverse audience, an increasingly varied audience, because it's not the same people that will buy a review who will buy a comic strip or a children's book. It's not the same people. But at the same time, and this is a fundamental point before I wrap up my introduction and I introduce our guests, at the same time, I think this very strong feeling that I get is that the books are the forward representation of museums beyond the walls. We've talked about lots of activities that we do outside of the walls of the museum, but we've been doing it for more than 200 years with books. We're outside of the walls with our books. So Bayer in Cahors in southwest France, or Dunkirk, northeast France, or even in Montreal in Quebec, that buys a catalogue from the National Library or the Louvre Museum or the Museum of Strasbourg, this person gets a feeling of becoming part of the museum community. And I think that's a really important thing. So with books, there is something that really fits people into time and space. To talk about all of this, we've got 4 high-quality speakers. They all come from some major French institutions, and I'm delighted to welcome them today. So we're going to ask 3 big questions I'm going to ask in turn. I'm going to start by introducing to you. I hope that she's with us online and can hear us well. Lize Braat, who is head of the publishing department at Strasbourg Museums. Lize, I hope you're there. I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me. Liz has been working since 2012 for the publishing department. She's got a very interesting background. She brings together literature and visual arts with a particular focus on the form of the books and the graphic design of the books that she publishes. We also have with us Cécile Martin, who is head of public publications at the Muséum of Natural History in Paris. She's worked in various humanities publishing houses. She worked at the National Library of France and joined the new National Museum of Natural History to head up the public publications department in 2022. She's going to talk about her very ambitious publications at the Natural History Museum. I know you will know of this very fascinating museum. There's several different buildings, several different collections, and she's going to talk about the Cabinet of Curiosities collection. She'll tell us a bit more of that shortly. We've also got Laure, who's head of the publishing department at the National Library of France. So she's been there since 2025. Previously, she headed up the Musée Museum in Marseille from 2012 to 2024. And I'm sure she'll talk about her experience at the Muséum. And she was there. When she was there, she launched some new ways of publishing about fine arts. And I think you've also worked in Strasbourg, is that right? So there's a common theme there. And then I've got sales and marketing direction at the GrandPalaisRmn. She's for RMN for a long time. Previously, she worked for Paris Museums. I think that's right. So Virginie has been with RMN since 2003 and has been sales and marketing director since May 2023. She plays a key role in the things that Émilie Girard was talking about earlier, all of the relations with the various bookshops that are run by RMN, which are key outlets. Ladies, thank you very much for being with us. And I'd like to start by asking a first question, which will take a bit of time to answer. I'll try and be the timekeeper for you.
So, as I said earlier, this really is at the heart of what we're trying to do, and books are at the heart of the exhibition space, and that is important to bear in mind. However, as we said earlier, we are often intending these for a wider audience, whether or not they are visitors to the institution. And this is important to mention. And it is also a commercial product where financial returns are expected. So, in your opinion, in your institutions and more generally, how is this contradiction conceived, managed, argued, and contextualized in each of your institutions? And how does your publishing policy in each of your institutions address this? Do you consider this in terms of publishing policy? Or is it more on a case-by-case basis, depending on each instance? If you don't mind, I'm going to start with Laure, and then we will move on to Cécile, Lize, and Virginie. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. So these are questions that we often ask ourselves. We recognize each other. We often speak to each other about these topics together, but not often in front of an audience. So as the head of the Department of Books and Publishing at the French National Library means that I'm not necessarily particularly comfortable here today. We're not just a museum. We're a real special case in the cultural landscape in France, and that's why you're here. So yes, allow me to remind you, first of all, as Émilie said earlier about what a publishing policy is or editorial policy, it's the choices made about what we are going to publish or what we choose not to publish. Who our target audiences and how, what tone, what kind of writing, in what format more generally, and also what is the economic returns of this, so how can it be sustainable. So we have our private publishing house. It depends on the institution that we belong to, and it defends what it represents, what it communicates, what it programs. So what are the visitors? What are the readers? The audiences? And as I said previously, these are our audiences. So the BNF is a unique institution that aims to collect, conserve, enrich, and communicate national documentary heritage. It conserves what is read and what is documented, and it considers heritage as a trace of knowledge. This means that it conserves texts, images, documents, objects, and this is not the same relationship to heritage as museums have. It welcomes researchers, readers, and we conserve 40 million documents. There's only 900 pieces exhibited within a museum, and the specificity of this library is that we also have the LIGO deposition with over 4,000 entries each year that enter into these national collections. So the historical foundation of the National Library is this legal deposit. So we are intended to conserve the national documents. This means that we need to have documentary rigor, and it also adds complexity to our tasks. So where does publishing fit into all of this? So the publishing policy cannot be considered a secondary activity or just an extension of our cultural program. It is a strategic function in its own right within the mission of the institution. So within this kind of organization founded on collection, the transmission of knowledge, publishing is when this knowledge becomes readable, organized, and can be distributed. The exhaustivity, this desire for universality, perhaps, does not spontaneously produce meaning. It requires sorting, understanding, interpretation. We are not creating a hierarchy of our documents. So, like museums, we have to play this editorial role in deciding what is published and what is not. I don't think we have the same way of publishing depending on the different institutions, even for our exhibition catalogues. As you were saying earlier, Cécile used to work that I used to work in the Muséum, and we do not have the same policies and the same kind of publications. It's about the tone that we strike, the formats, the level of scientific knowledge within our discourse. We don't have the same approach to content. At the BNF, we are expected to give a certain scientific approach in our discourse, in our reference publications as well, which is why within our publishing policy, we have incorporated this interest for scientific publication. This is a real pillar of our publishing policy. We work with researchers. We have 300 curators within the institution who can assist us within this. Beyond this, the exhibition catalogues are part of our cultural programming, and we're looking for codes, and we also do look at what other institutions do. Readers expect experimental formats, expect there to be space for images. They're not the same as the catalogues that we had in the past, where there were essays and notices on one side with pictures that followed the exhibition. We expect narration nowadays. We expect storytelling. In our most recent publications, before I was part of the team, research was carried out and we experimented with formats. So I can show you a couple of examples here. My apologies, the pile is a little bit large. This is an exhibition that we opened yesterday at the National Library of France, and the texts are analyses in order to public maps. So this is called Imaginary Maps, and it talks about mapping and cartography. So we needed to explain what we could see. A work in a museum can also be reproduced without having discourse, without notices that summarize a creation. For us, this is documentary heritage. Maps don't necessarily say anything on their own. We need to accompany them with a text. So we have decided to have notices. An exhibition that is coming out soon. We've got a really small format here. This is one of the smallest exhibition catalogues available within the library at the moment. But this might not be true for other institutions when I look at my colleagues. So this is around the collection of the Arsenal. We wanted the format and the publishing was worked on collectively to have a polyphonic book, and we will talk about this in greater detail later when we talk about the formatting. But these are the exhibition catalogues, just a couple of examples. And we also work in another sector of valorization or dissemination. So this is a very diverse sector. I've taken a few examples, but this is a real range of small publications, a point of entry for our collections on various topics. We've got around 50 titles that are very visible. They're a real collection. And we have the genesis, so the origins of the National Library, the collections, and we translate this, adapt it, and edit it depending on our current audiences. And we modify the texts and images that were there originally, and it's to protect this heritage. We have a comic strip as well. We've worked on albums with contemporary pictures as well. And we also have thematic works that look at what we're doing here at the BNF. We've published a work on maternity, gardening. This autumn, we're going to be looking at the history of cake making and pastry making in France, some things that we might not even imagine, but that really are relevant to what we do here at the BNP. So we'd like to thank you, Laure, and now I'm going to hand over to Cécile Martin. And I know that this issue is not without its complexity. The Natural History Museum, as I said earlier, really is a collection of different institutions, of museums, and also gardens, research laboratories, and an extraordinary library as well. So there's a real challenge here, a desire to record, but also to go a little bit further and to build narratives, as Laure just mentioned. Yes, thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you for the organisers for inviting me here and my institution that I'm representing. So before going further into this question, I would like to remind you what the National Museum of Natural History is. This is perhaps somewhat different to other French establishments. We cover 10 sites. Some are open to the public and some are not, and this is across France. And above all, it is a large research institute in natural and human sciences, with teaching as well. There really are varied missions, and this is designed to disseminate knowledge to a very large audience. And this is why we need publications within this museum environment. We have two publications departments within our institution, as there is a department older than mine, which is the service of scientific publications that dates back to the 19th century. They have a very long history, and they have a different mission in this department than my own department. They are publishing original research results for peers. They sometimes publish printed formats that are not like what we have here on the table. Lots of digital publications as well, as a lot of the research results are published in open source formats, and they're very different to what I and my colleagues are doing. So we are dependent on a different department to the scientific research department. And there are a lot of diverse areas taken into account here. The presence of publications in a department that's so varied could be questions, but we want to contribute to the profile of our institution, how well it's known, with sponsoring even. So this is why we are involved in this department, and we do need to question the scientific nature of our publications. We have very specialized researchers on one side, and then people just discovering our institution on the other. With the general public work, we want to target the visitors to our sites and those who are not necessarily visiting, but who might be visiting the library, for instance. So our publishing strategy is to have two pillars with a complementarity of around 12 publications each year. We're a small team compared to some of my colleagues. Those on the stage, in any case, there are 3 of us working within the public publications department at the museum. We try to seek complementarity between what is linked to our cultural program and our sites, so exhibition catalogues for the large Gallery of Evolution, but also for the Musée de l'Homme, Museum of Man in Paris, visitor guides for visitors to our sites, which can be distributed in our bookshops as well. We think that this distribution channel has its own rationale that is not necessarily going to be the same as the shops in our sites. And we've observed that this complementarity works quite well. What worked best in bookshops can be focused on research, the conservation of our collections as well. This is very important. There are over 68,000 specimens, without talking about the pieces within our library that Dominique has talked about. So just to give you an example of what worked really well in our bookshop last year, this is S'Aventurière, a natural history from a female perspective. This represents over 4 years of work with 40 authors to showcase feminine figures in our archives that contributed to writing the history, our natural history, but did not receive the visibility that they deserved. So this is one of our best sellers in the bookshop last year. The next one, Cabinets of Curiosities, with 2 small formats with a lot of illustrations in order to show, to give access to collections that are not necessarily visible. There is a lot of our collections that are not accessible. They are intended for research purposes. There are teams of researchers from the museum and also from other large research institutions internationally that are accessing these collections. So we wanted to show the interest of these collections, their beauty, their richness, and how they can enrich research. So these have also had a lot of popularity in our bookshops. On site, it's going to be exhibition catalogues and visitor guides. So in terms of complementarities, we want to have these two distribution and sales networks. This is a virtuous circle. And in terms of turnover, just to give you some concrete information, in terms of our distribution, we're generating as many sales in terms of our turnover in our bookshop and in our sites. So this is a complementarity that works very well. However, and we are very attentive to this point in our publication committees, the hoped profitability of our publications is not going to dictate our publishing strategies and our publishing decisions. I think this is very important. We look at things in the opposite way. So when there's a program of research or exploration, when we think that it deserves to be showcased in the form of a book or publication, when we're thinking in the long term, when we identify a topic where we think that it would deserve wider distribution, we then ask questions about the format, how we can create this narrative, which is very important, instead of thinking about profit that is going to be dictating our publishing and editorial choices. And I think that it's important to remember this. Thank you very much, Cécile. And perhaps we can also hand round the S'Aventurière and the Cabinets of Curiosities. These are two beautiful publications. I'm going to hand over to Lize, Braat now. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me as well? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much for speaking this evening. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm afraid I wasn't able to be with you around the table today. I apologize that I have not been able to bring my own publications, but I think that Émilie has brought a few that can be added to the pile. There is a document that I could share with you. Is this working? Can you see the document? It might take a bit of time to load. So I just wanted to present the Strasbourg Museum's publishing department. So the Strasbourg Museums is a number of museums structured around a central department. Another specificity is that these institutions have very different types of collections and audience and public policies that are still being developed that naturally attract quite contrasting types of visitors. We are able to set ourselves apart as a publishing department because we have a dedicated team within the municipality. There are only two of us, but we have publishing activities that are sold in books and within in the name of the city of Strasbourg. It's quite rare for a city outside of Paris. It's often co-published. So in response to Dominique's question, I consider that it is really project by project that we are developing new publishing formats with the aim of achieving complementarity between more scientific projects and projects designed for a wider audience. Let me give you an example. Can you see my screen, what I'm showing on the screen? So our Musée de l'Œuvre Notre-Dame, which has had an consistent exhibition program based on the history of Strasbourg. It's covered artistic work in Strasbourg from 1200 to 1600 or so. And this is an exhibition that is updating knowledge on specific artistic periods. So this program needed exhibition catalogues, old school, catalogues, if you like, with a certain number of essays, with footnotes, a very traditional exhibition catalogue. But within this publication, we wanted, as Cécile said, promote specifics of the book. So the ability to build narrative, pacing, sequencing, even within quite a conventional publication, to create spaces with different types of texts so that readers that are not interested in the harder text to engage with the topics, so that we can share something at the origin of the project. And this is what you can see here. So this exhibition is really seeking the rediscovery and restoration of preparatory sketches for the Strasbourg cathedral structures and sculptures. This is what you can see here on the screen. The idea was to coordinate within this publication more scientific discourse, very specific discourse on precise elements, with sequences of images that are quite lyrical, quite expressive, so that readers can approach these topics and understand quite quickly the interest, the current interest that we have, that people can have in appreciating these works of art. We have something quite systematic, and here you can see on my second slide, with a larger exhibition, we try, if the budget allows it, if the organization allows it, to have satellite publications that are going to cost less than the exhibition catalogue. These are designed when we discover the list of works, and we often discover graphic collections that specifically could be put into this kind of book. So here are two examples for the 1560 to 1600 Extravagance Renaissance exhibition. So we can see this architecture sketches from Wendell Dieterlen, and he produced a work called Architectura with a number of extravagant architectural designs. The iconography expressed within this could still inspire people today. So alongside this, a more specific publication for young people, which translates into English as a small, strange and marvelous book of art. Yesterday's models for today, with sketches from artists, sculptors, painters. This is all kind of facsimile with models of hands and hairstyles and heads, etc. We've discovered this book and we thought it was really great, something very graphic that could even evoke tattoos, a fantastical and marvelous world that even innocent readers that aren't aware of this period could engage with. So we were able to make these two complementary publications. As Cécile said, this meant that we were able to have different temporalities as well. There's the exhibition catalogue that's linked to the opening that may end up ending after the exhibition closes as well. But then we have a more plural offering that has less of a sell-by date. And our experience is that these publications on our collections can be showcased during exhibitions, but there are different temporalities, and it allows people to discover collections. I think the main vector is desire and surprise. And this is specifically true for visitors to the library. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lize. And we will be able to come back to the collections later. I would just like to show something here. This is the cabinet, and we'll talk about that later. So I'm just going to hand over to Virginie Perreau straight away now. And she is going to be talking today. When I became a curator, we talked about the natural editor of national museums, and there was a commission of publishers with Malmaître, and we didn't know if the publications would be accepted at the time. And now with the creation of public institutions and the new museums as legal entities, we co-publish often with you. And there's also a kind of competition that's been established as well, with aspects linked to the museum, but also more independent. So thank you very much, Virginie. And Sophie Laporte is not able to be with us today. She's in Lens, where I am not, for a great exhibition where Annabelle Thérèse and another colleague of mine are curators. So yes, GrandPalaisRmn was under the scope of national museums for many years. We are an old institution. We celebrated our 130th anniversary this year. And the question of publishing was present even within the Articles of Association of our institution. The reality is that it was really built up in the 1930s. There is a department of publications for art. So Sophie Laporte, who is director of this, manages the book publishing and the iconography and molding workshops. There's just over 90 publications each year. The production is great. And 1,200 active publications where we are trying to work in the long term on the distribution of these works.
The fairly atypical thing. Sorry, I forgot to say that how delighted I am to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I hope that I will be up to the assignment I've been given to by Sophie Laporte. The slightly different thing about our institution is that we're not a museum. We don't have a collection, and for a long time the Grand Palais, our biggest premises, was closed. So we tend to work with other museums, other publishers, in order to co-publish works, and that's one of our strengths. Actually, it's been vital for our business model. It's also helped to shape our editorial policy, and it's really enriched the way we work, because we've seen that each publishing house, each institution thinks very carefully and deeply about how it publishes its works and how to reach its audience. So every time we co-publish a work, we rub up against all of this knowledge and information. Sophie and her teams are enriched by working in partnership, and that feeds into our business model. And so that's probably one of the things that explains how diverse our different published titles are. That's why we've expanded our young people's offering significantly. When the Grand Palais closed, we had to find new modes of expression, and so we decided to turn to publishing for children and young people quite extensively. The business we're in is quite competitive. About 10% of our publications are not things where there's a major amount of competition. Some of the scientific reviews, like the reviews of Museums of France, and some of the publications benefit from grant funding, but otherwise the rest of our publications are business ventures within a very competitive space. That's one of our young people's works, a children's book. It's been very successful, and it was found to be very meaningful when it was published at the time of the Nikita Safal exhibition. So I'm going to talk a bit more about publishing. The P&L is, it's not necessarily something that we do for pleasure, but it's like our compass that helps us to take decisions, editorial decisions about what formats our books will be published in, what are the target organised. We want to publish books so they can be read, so they can reach people. So the initiative I'm talking about is a tool that helps us to make decisions. Sometimes the decisions are difficult decisions. When we receive text, sometimes they don't fit in with the planned format, and if we change the format, we increase it too much, the cost will increase. So it's not necessarily there's not a huge amount of pricing elasticity around book selling. We're not finding it to be a constraint. It's a really good tool that enables us to think about the format of the book, and that's why our discussions with salespeople are very useful. We try to have such discussions for everything we publish before we launch a project, when Sophie's teams are still in design phase. And I think one of the useful things that Sophie's put in place are editorial committees where we look back at former publications. Some of our publications don't have the success that was hoped for, and we talk about what is it that has meant that this book hasn't worked well. Sometimes things that sell well in our museum bookshop network, it doesn't work so well in bookshops outside of our institutions. So that's quite interesting as well. What is it that means that this publication hasn't worked so well? Were we too ambitious? Why did it not find its niche within book selling? And that's a really enriching thing to think about within the publishing department that Sophie manages. Thank you, Virginie. Thank you, all four of you, for this initial set of answers. I think one of the interesting things is that you all agreed on how specific museum publishing is. I think that's an important point to raise. I think it's important to say that we shouldn't have one big public publishing policy which is identical for everyone. That wouldn't be useful. I think each museum has a specific identity, and the roles in the different museums in Strasbourg, in the Natural History Museum or RMN, there are some shared missions, but there's some very specific roles that each institution plays. Second point is that something you all mentioned, we didn't say at the start, but I think it's vital, is this idea of storytelling. It seems an obvious thing, but I suppose we're asking what our museums and national libraries are talking about. They're talking about images and pictures, and books are often the best way to talk about a narrative, a story. Telling stories can happen in images as well, and those who know me will know that I'm very attached to the rhythm and the pacing of text and images within a book. So that's an important point to think about in storytelling in the works we publish. Another point that you all raised, which I think is very interesting and we should bear in mind, you used words such as profile, readability. Even the most obscure and academic book needs to be readable. Its text, its images, its layout needs to be readable. And with respect to traditional narrative and storytelling, there's an issue all around interpretation. We're not talking about something that is literally interpreted. We're talking about saying something that can be interpreted. That's a really important point. You all also use this term liberty, freedom, and that's a really important point for publishing. Some people who write in our catalogues, I'm very lucky to be both author and to have had a past in publishing, being a publisher myself. I still am involved in the publication committee for the art review. So I see both sides of this activity. I've headed up a number of publishing initiatives. I know that some of my colleagues who are writers think that publishing just comes with a whole load of constraints. I was asked to write a certain amount of characters. I've gone over the word limit, but why should I cut it down? Or I've got a really small picture, it's really interesting, but I'm being told it's not going to be visible in the work, and I want to put it in anyway. I think there's an important thing here which is not always thought about in publishing, is the issue of time and time scale. I wonder if you've got something to say on this theme. Very often, and particularly for exhibition catalogues, we go too quickly through things and we don't give ourselves the time for discussions between the lead publisher, the editor, this discussion with the salespeople. I think it'll be interesting to hear about that. I know these questions are raised. Sometimes these issues are tricky to handle, but it's important to talk about them. So I'd be keen to answer this question. When we talk about projects, the issue of who is leading the work is always really important. In the initial meetings, you've often got someone who wants to put together a project. There's an exhibition that has been put together, and there's a list of works that have been put together. And very often, the curators think that because they've made the exhibition, they think the book is going to come together very easily. And then that's where we have our meetings and we can bring our expertise to play. And there's a lot of discussion to say, okay, you've got this project, so we're not taking it off you. You've got a key rule. You'll be have a work as a leading role in it. But the publishing department does have to play a role in helping the book find its audience. There's an issue about, it's not necessarily so much about who's leading it, but how we work together, how we form a collective teams. Working together as a team is really important. It's not just the director of the work, there's just the publisher, the editor, there's also the designer, there's the whole chain, there's a printer as well. If the printer makes, or the binder makes an error in the final step of it, the book will be a failure. So all of these discussions are really important. All of these discussions take time. All of these phases in publishing require a bit of time. You need to think about the content. You need to take time to think about the structure of the work. You need to take time to work with the designers, the photographers, the printing team, and all of these phases need to be given enough time. That is a really important point, and it segues nicely into the second question that I wanted to ask you. We've already discussed something a little bit around it about creativity, because as I said in my introduction, praise God, the book is not dead, despite what was predicted 15 or 20 years ago. But nonetheless, books need to stand out from what you can find on digital platforms. There are a lot of platforms presenting scientific research, and you can find information on them, but that's not what a book is about. It's not just about information. It's not a collection of 10 essays. You can do something different with a book, and that's why a lot of reviews exist both in paper form and online, because the two formats are not the same, and what you put into each format is specific. So the question I want to raise is, how do you implement this creativity, not just with the authors and the directors of publication, but how do you work with the other roles that are involved in putting a book together, which we might know of less, the layout designer and the other members of the design team who play an important central role? I can think of an example from my experience. The guide of the Louvre that we published with Sophie Laporte was very successful because Sophie met Aurélie Lafarina and myself. We came together and imagined something together. I didn't write a text which was then laid out. We were writing and laying it out at the same time. There was an incredible kind of alchemy that came together there. But Laure was talking about the manufacturing process, the choice of paper, which is not a insignificant question as well. The production of a mock-up. What do you do in terms of typography? What do you do with the pictures? Will there be different types of paper effects? So I'd like to start by turning to Lize, who I hope is still online with us in Strasbourg. I'll hand over to you first of all, because I know that each one of you works on these issues, but Lize, I know in Strasbourg you've worked very closely with the local graphic design schools, and that's part of Strasbourg's culture. Strasbourg, which was which is a French town, but has a particular link with graphic design. So Lize, over to you. Yes, thank you very much. In Strasbourg, we've got another interesting feature, because one of the key common features is that we're a public sector publisher, so we have to comply with a certain number of public procurement rules. So there has to be a consultation. We have to ask for at least 3 quotations, or depending on the exhibition budget, we actually have to publish calls for tenders, which might get 20 or 25 responses. That's tricky. And then we've started to have closer relationships with some graphic designers. We've built friendships up with some of them, and it was a little bit difficult in our role in public procurement to make objective choices of the graphic designers we wanted to work with. So a dozen years ago or so, we said that in addition to the public procurement rules, we would agreed that we would work only once with a graphic designer, once per work, and that gives some advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that for some designers that we really enjoyed working with, we are disappointed not to be able to continue working with them. But I guess that enriches the work on our catalogue. We try to ensure that for the books we have coming out, we try very hard, and just as Laure was saying earlier, to play a role as a public institution, which is to allow graphic designers to access these really interesting public sector commissions. To work on a museum catalogue is very stimulating from a visual and intellectual point of view, and the financial terms might be a little bit more comfortable than working on other private sector projects. So I think our role as a public sector publisher is also to allow people and our designers and so on to work in decent conditions, not just our graphic designers, but also our editors, reviewers, our translators. We want to work in trusted relationships where people enjoy working together, and with this very important idea of the time scale, which is to give ourselves time to think, to reflect, to produce a mature piece of work in our projects. And that's why we prefer to work on our permanent collections rather than the urgent time scales that we have for temporary exhibition catalogues. And that's why we think that our content in our permanent collection catalogues are perhaps better fitted to it. I sent some of the books that you gave Émilie around the room. We also have an additional rule, which is, as well as changing graphic designers for each project, we also give at least one project per year to a foreign designer, because there are different cultures around books in different countries, and we think that it's very rich for us in our catalogues to have different types of approach. Some approaches which are more editorial focused, some more graphically rich. So for our own personal discipline, we try to have some contrasting collaborations. So here's a sample of some of our recent publications. So on the left you see a book that we published with a Dutch graphic designer, a very experienced designer who has a long history of publishing. It's a fairly interesting book where some of the content is hidden, and we've then got a book about katagami, which are Japanese stencil works. It's more of an old style catalogue with a very comprehensive approach, with another part that has a lyric approach. We did that with a Swiss designer living in London. And then the final book, Lumière sur le Vivant, it's the catalogue that went along with the invitation to Vincent Munier to Strasbourg. We worked with a very young graphic designer who'd been through design school, who had a very interesting lyrical idea, quite different to Vincent Munier's work, and it's had quite a bit of success with the audience. It was a bit of a cheaper book to what we did for our traditional photo books. And I think with all of these approaches, we try to give scope for the graphic designer to express themselves pretty freely. And so here, the collection that you mentioned several times, and we're delighted that you like it, is this collection, Le Cabinet de l'Amateur, and it focuses particularly on our museum's permanent collections. And one of the reasons for the creativity of this collection is the constraint. The management at the time asked us to work on a series of publications for tourists visiting our museums. We wanted to move outside of the kind of traditional souvenir books for tourists, but we didn't know quite what to do with this commission. We didn't know how to tackle it because there is the different establishments that we have in our different museums, our different institutions, that they're all different, and the curators have different personalities. It was difficult to find a model, a layout that would work for all of the museums. So what we decided to do was turn things round. Instead of doing a set of best of collections, we did a set of works that focused on the works in the museums characteristic of those museums. There are sets of works or items from the collections which are all slightly bizarre, slightly unexpected, slightly things that you wouldn't expect to see in a museum. And although it was a bit of a risky step to take, it seems to have been quite successful, and it's something we've carried over into our publishing policy in general, which is to try to draw readers in through curiosity and surprise to visit our establishments. And the price is very affordable. Yes, it's a 16-page album and it costs €9. So it's generally mainly pictures with a small amount of text, short texts, 15,000 characters, and it describes an existing collection. It's a series that's been going since 2015, and it has new titles coming out quite regularly. So here we've got details from some of the paintings in the Fine Arts Museum. Then you've got some which are more on three-dimensional objects. The editorial line is focusing on curiosity, unexpected items, and that, I suppose, enables some of the titles to stay in the bookshelves for quite a long period of time. I'm going to hand the floor to one of the other speakers. What Lize has just said talked quite a bit about confidence and trust, but also the way that the publishing departments are a kind of shared space, almost like a conductor in an orchestra. We've talked quite a bit in museums and in libraries of scenography, because there is a scenographic approach to the way exhibitions are presented. But I think you've got a similar approach to publication, just like in Strasbourg and in the National Library. You bring together lots of different aspects, and you don't always do the same thing. Yes, that's right. You're absolutely right. And another unique feature, specific feature is probably the key word for tonight, isn't it? Yes, we were talking about exhibition catalogue and the various constraints that go with it. I think in the Natural History Museum, the culture we're trying to promote is the scientific culture. So our exhibitions are not necessarily thought of in scenographic terms. It's not necessarily the items of the collection which will determine the way the exhibition is designed, but scientific notions. So there'll be a lot of interactive exhibitions, things to be touched and felt. So these modules can't necessarily be turned straight into a book, into a story that is told. So our work is to think about how these scientific concepts, which start in a scenographic style in the museums, can make sense as a written work. And so we try to think about how we'll turn it not into a complicated essay, but to use creativity to bring illustrations into the book. We're thinking about how we can illustrate and create images to speak of the scientific concept. And I think the Museum of Natural History has a particular status amongst science museums. We have a interesting relationship with art. Naturalist art is something that we have, and the next big exhibition that we've got for our 400 years anniversary in our big gallery of evolution is going to be focusing next year on naturalist painting and naturalist art, and we are following in the footsteps of all of the history of our institution. Let me give you an example. One of the issues that we face when I think about adapting an audio-visual content is also this issue of timescale, because these items which are part of the exhibition, which help explain what's going on, they sometimes come in quite late in the day, whereas we have to publish a book earlier down the line, or certainly work on it to publish it at the same time the exhibition opens. So we work very closely with exhibition designers right from the start of the exhibition. We work very closely with our colleagues in the exhibitions department to think about the form in which we can publish a book and what what degree of freedom we can have with respect to the exhibition in order to turn it into something that would work well as a book. Let me give you an example here. Here's a catalogue for the Migrations exhibition. So this is from the most recent but one exhibition in the Museum of Humanity. So the storytelling around migratory journeys was really important for our museum catalogue, but it was going to be very difficult to use the exact content that was used in the audiovisual exhibits at the museum. So we started to work with the curators and the scientific experts to talk about how we could tell the stories of migration in a way that would work in a book format. So we worked with a dozen researchers who had done field research with people who had been through a variety of different migration journeys, and we asked them to choose one story out of all of these migration stories, one story that had particularly marked them, and to retell it with a limited number of words, of course, in cooperation with the person whose story it was. So these different journeys were included in our museum catalogue publication, and we thought about how we could embody these journeys or illustrate them. Photos are something a little bit too in your face. So we asked an illustrator who didn't know the people, and she listened to the stories that were being told and started to draw portraits to illustrate the different migratory journeys. And one of the interesting things that for some of the people whose story was told, the researchers did, that's really strange. It really looks quite like the person. Yes, I bought that catalogue, and it's really interesting thing because the book becomes something that the exhibition is not. That's a question that we do think about. Should the exhibition catalogue be a complete reflection of the exhibition? But something I say is that an exhibition is not a book, and a book is not an exhibition. What works well is to find some common ground where the two come together, and that's something that's important. And I remember when we were talking together in preparation of this evening, this particular book is a really good example of some of these issues. Virginie, I'm going to hand you the floor now to talk about some of these issues that your institution works on. Talk about the teams that you work with, the people who are involved, the people who work within GrandPalaisRmn. You've got people who are bookmakers who are very talented, who work with you, and that's a key point. And I think increasingly you open up your manufacturing workbook, your bookmaking workbook to authors and writers. Yes, you're absolutely right. When we talk about the design of a work, we're talking about design of a book. In our case, we are working both on the format but also on the fundamental contents. So right from the outset, it's important to work with bookmakers who know all about the different papers you could use, who will have an eye for these things. You need to work with a graphic designer who has a really important role right from the outset, right from the earliest moments of book design. Those are two really key roles, and I would agree with what Cécile has just said. If you are thinking about an exhibition, you'll have an exhibition catalogue, but these are two different things, the exhibition and the catalogue, with two different timescales. An exhibition has a short life. Here's an example I want to show you, a book that was published based on, it's a co-published work with the Picasso Museum. It was a difficult exhibition on degenerate art. Some works that are quite dark and cover a dark period of history. This book was published to go alongside the exhibition, but it is a book which is going to have a longer life. It's going to continue to be a reference and sell over years to come. So the teams working with Sophie on this book needed to take into account the fact that there was going to be an exhibition. There are works that will enable this exhibition to have a longer life in the time. So the idea of this book was very much impregnated by this thought about how the book could have a longer life. I'll show you a few more examples in a moment, because it's important to think about how the book will find life after it's been presented to the press and the media. We've got a work by Hervé Tullet. We said his work is a lot about colour, so we should publish a colouring book. So it's like a derivative project. It's a byproduct. So there was an initial work that was published, but then we did some other items, a kind of merchandising around it.
So there's another thing that Sophie does, and museum guides are really something that they need to tell us that it's no longer dead. And yes, I'm sure there are a lot of people here in the room today that will be able to tell you that that is not the case. So we have a wonderful Louvre guide that works really well, and we've also got mini guides. So as many languages and as there are colors, There are lots of different topics. There's an object here, treaties. There's been a lot of work done at the Musée de l'Orangerie. We supported them with the same graphic designer. They wanted 4 different colors. And we look at what happens in our bookshops. Some visitors must be bilingual as they buy both at the same time in different languages. And for merchandising for your people working in your bookshops, this is incredible for their merchandising. These can be positioned as impulse buys. And there's also an economic interest in publishing these kind of books at the same time. So publishing really does think about all of these different points about the manufacturer and their interest. But also there is a lot of thinking around how the book will be able to take its place and be seen in a bookshop. I'm going to hand over to Laure now. So I'm thinking of this perhaps because I've got it in front of my eyes here. So you have been working with young people's and children's books. And I know that you have this incredible collection with the National Library of France. But if you could tell me what you wanted to say about my question, but also I wanted to specifically ask you about these children's publications. Everybody's really said some very impressive things, but I can say that I do see a lot of publishing freedom. But this is not our everyday experience. We are subject to the public archives. There are a lot of contradictions as a public institution, as I said in my introduction. We have to have a public service mission. We can't be in competition with private publishers. We have to support our collections and also our resources. As we heard from Strasbourg, for our graphic designers, we are always looking for new ways of supporting the emergence of a creation within quite a restricted environment. These constraints can actually produce this, and I think it's quite remarkable what's happening in our different institutions. Yes, you are asking me about children's publications. We have a department at the BNF called the Reserve of Rare Books, and they really have some remarkable work going on. They found things that nobody was aware of. We're working with an extraordinary curator that proposes collections and shows us works within her collection, and then we are able to select what could be republished and in what way. This also requires a lot of research into the legal rights for this small book called the Rayon Enchanté that I am passing around. The iconographers had to find the copyright holders of the author, and they had to find a genealogical descendants even. It was not simple to obtain the rights to this. There's a lot of work, not only in selecting the publications, but also in ensuring that they can be republished. Thank you so much to all 4 of you. It is really extraordinary to be able to hear you all. And yes, there are constraints, as we mentioned in the introduction. The long law means that we are not able to compete with private publishers. We cannot receive sponsorship for a specific book. We can receive it for other things, but not for this book, unless this book is a scientific book. And this is a complicated point for us, but this does not prevent creativity, and it does not prevent us from having similar intentions, but very different results. So I encourage this diversity. I think it is important to recall that this at a time where cultural issues are sometimes threatened. And this high level of diversity helps open people towards culture and helps them to discover collections, museums, museums of fine art, society, national libraries, and many others. This is essential. This is a point of entry for intellectuals, but also it's very creative, and I'm delighted at this. So I'd like to ask a third question now. This is perhaps a little bit less fun, but it is an essential point. Without talking about immediate costs, we have mentioned that books also have associated economics, the cost of paper, inventory. As you know, this is goes without saying, but the person who earns the less in a book is the author, and I'm saying this with a smile, but that's not necessarily reflecting my beliefs. That's the way it is. The publishers aren't going to earn a lot, so it's actually the distributor that is earning the most, and that's the way that the industry is structured. So there's an economic challenge here as well. This is important. And as public publishers with distribution across national territory and also international territory, Virginie alluded to this earlier. There are distribution networks, relationships with representatives of distributors, with bookshops, but also with libraries and media libraries in France and internationally. And these are important challenges, but we struggle to cover all of this. So GrandPalaisRmn, you'll be talking about this later. Virginie, you do this quite well as a publisher, and you have a unique link to distributors, but we do struggle more. We have an obligation to be present in both bookshops and libraries, but we're not always very attentive to this. I know that you will be in the publishing departments, but our decision makers, the bosses, the people who make the decisions, once the object exists, they don't really care about the distribution. Are we in bookshops? Are we being bought by libraries, media libraries, etc.? This isn't really a question. We don't have links with large buyers for libraries and media libraries, public and private institutions. This is a point where we're quite fragile. And another complex point is the relationship with international distribution. And in France, we really are especially bad at this. There's no other way of saying it. We're not necessarily bad at it because of the languages. French people have spoken other languages for a very long period of time. It's because we do not know networks of distribution. We don't know which publishers to align ourselves with. And this is a complicated issue. So we are restricted to the French market, whereas many of the books that we have shown you today would be interesting for people outside of France, but we don't have the right distribution networks in place for this. So we are moving away from this beautiful creativity that we have discussed. But I would like to know how these different challenges, including costs, how we can save costs, space as well is also. We want to have a huge book, but it's going to be difficult to find it a space in bookshops or in libraries. It's going to be more challenging. Or Virginie, like you were saying earlier, how can we extend the life cycle of an exhibition catalogue beyond the duration of the exhibition itself? So I always tell bookshops that please stop removing the books instantly. These are collection books. So how can we take all of this into account? I'm going to hand over to Virginie, first of all, because I know that the National Museums institution is very involved in this. So I'm going to start by the network of libraries. This is a significant proportion of our turnover. All of our institutions have a bookshop. This is the place where we see publications first and foremost. It's a real showcase. The catalogues that are piled up. the specificity of our bookshops in our museums is that we are working on new products, but we're also working on the collections as well. So for us in our bookshops, it's important to have a dialogue with publishers. The best book shopkeeper in the world will not know the collections as well as the publisher. So there needs to be associations with the new products on the table. We need to think about how we can associate new products with collection-based products. How can we link that in with the news and new things happening in the museum, events such as seminars? This really does require significant dialogue, and that's a very important point. And then there's a lot of work. So this represents 30% of our turnover in books. It has fallen a little bit. It's not books that have fallen. Books are maintaining very well, and I'm sure they will continue to maintain their position. It's that we have moved from souvenir shops with concept stores with a much broader offering. Books are being maintained, and we are struggling with foreign visitors because they are coming in low-cost planes. We're trying to make books with paper that's as light as possible, but there is a real obstacle for international visitors to go back with books in their cases. There are some countries where there's also much less of a book culture. We do the Louvre a bookshop in Abu Dhabi as well. It's very difficult to sell books. International visitors don't want to put this inside their cases, and the national visitors don't necessarily have this within their culture. The importance of working with the bookshops within institutions to sell these collections and the long-standing collections throughout the year. It's really important because publishers really do know what they're talking about here. The second point is that it's important to work with representatives. Representatives really represent novelty, new products. They're not necessarily going to be working on these baseline collection products. So there are strong economic constraints. Bookshops are not doing especially well. It's a very difficult job. So the margins really are very low if we compare with other distribution channels. So where possible, it's important to have sales staff within the publishing team to remind the publisher of this work, to help representatives work on existing publications, giving them all of the keys for associating this with new products and existing products. When we have the possibility of having someone within the publishing team, somebody who is going to be able to challenge representatives, not about these new products, but about existing products, that's excellent. I'm not as familiar with libraries. I have not been working on these issues for a very long time. Thank you very much. Thank you for these points. Laure, I'm going to hand over to you now. So how in the National Library are you working? You also have an institute. Yes, we work with a bookshop owner almost every day, showing different covers. We work a lot with her, even on our models and our mock-ups before print. We're working hard with her every single day. So we have 4 sites, Schulvia, Tolbiac, the Opéra Garnier Library, and the Arsenal. So the Arsenal does not have a direct point of sale, and it's the Artium consortium that works with the opera site. We are fortunate to have a sales team. We are lucky. These sales staff work with representatives as our distribution is organized with Interforum. However, we have some books that we distribute ourselves, and we realize that it is much harder to penetrate the markets, and doing some door-to-door work with bookshops is a real job in itself. it's a lot harder to distribute. So scientific catalogs are much harder to distribute. We have to do a made-to-measure approach. Small BNF publications as well need to be worked on better. We're very present in trade shows. This is very important for us. So we try to take part in all of the trade shows organized in France because we can show a more general catalogue. We show new things, but we also show some books from our collections as well. And we, like we just heard, are also trying to sell these existing books from our collections. If you would allow me, are you in charge of this, or is it the sales team? It's the sales team that go to the trade shows, and we support them where we can. Given the coverage, we are not able to be in attendance at all of these trade shows. What was the other part of the question? About the export. Yes, I think you're right. We struggle with export sales. I don't know if we see foreign exhibition catalogues arriving in our collections in France either. So we do have work to do in this sense. The ideal would be to imagine some kind of synergy. If there's an traveling exhibition, it would be easier to get a foreign language catalogue. In the event that we've got the identity of our institution, it's not easy to promote this. We have a network of libraries, so there is discussion between the libraries and within the National Library network. So we are lucky. Yes, we do find your works in libraries and in bookshops as well, of course. So I just wanted to ask a question. When do you choose to use digital compared to paper, or perhaps alongside paper at the National Library? This is something that we're developing at the moment, but it's not that easy. Even in the practices of scientific publications, some researchers work on paper. Catalogues, inventories of sources. So money, the catalogues, Nismet works with paper, so they have to have their paper. We could say, oh, it would be easier to work digitally, but that's not the practice. So we're not switching straight to digital, even if we as publishers would find this more logical. We are a library and books are sacred to us, so we're not fully digitized for our scientific publications. However, we do have some works where we're working on two versions, including the digital version. Perhaps Lize, now I also wanted to ask the same question to you, the challenges associated with distribution and presence in trade shows as well. I know that you also attend trade shows. Yes, so another specificity for Strasbourg is that unlike our Parisian colleagues, we have very few sales locations on site for various reasons linked to the architecture, human resources, staff that aren't necessarily sales staff. Apart from the Zoology Museum that's just reopened, that has its own boutique, the others do not. So since the start of our activity, there are limitations. So exhibition catalogues do sometimes work, but we do not have this possibility, like our colleagues said, to have assortments, merchandising, or collections books because we have limited space. We don't have the furnishings required. The exception that we had until now was that the Contemporary Art Museum had a concession bookshop, but this has been closed in recent months. We don't even have this sales space anymore. So more naturally, we've become a publisher for bookshops rather than for museums. This is because of the constraints that we have faced. This is one of our unique features. As we heard for the BNF, and Laure worked on this when she was in Strasbourg. We had a distributor called Interforum, and the publishing strategy, the sales strategy of these groups has changed, and even the political orientations. And it's become a little bit difficult as public publishers to be working with these private distributors. We've decided to step away from Interforum. It was a friendly divorce. They didn't want to continue to distribute us either. And we've used a very different kind of distributor. We're working with Intera, and we were talking about the importance of foreign books as well. They were an importer of English-speaking art books. That's where they started with the Hudson. This is a distributor that's a much smaller size with around 20 to 25 people. They do not have the same strength, of course, as a large distributor like Interforum, but their work is much more suited to our type of production. And I think we're a little bit of a niche within a niche compared to my Parisian colleagues in terms of the people visiting our institutions, the profile of our institutions. We are much lower. But the decision that we made was to really accept this smaller scale, working with specialized bookshops and via this distributor. So our printing practices were that we were doing 2,000 to 2,500, knowing that we would have a lot of returns because art books are damaged. So we switched from this to something much more adjusted. And we think it's more virtuous and more responsible because there's a better display within the bookshop, so they're more likely to be seen by the visitors that would be interested. We've had this strategy, this policy to move away from the industrial chain of books to have a more artisanal approach to distribution. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lize and Cécile. The same question about distribution. Yes, this is similar to what Lize just said. So across all of the sites, there are some stores, but they're at very different scales. For L'Armas in the south of France, near Orange, there's just a small sales desk. There are a few books that will be available, but it's not like the Grande Galerie or the Musée de l'Homme, where books are not the objects that sell the best. The Grande Galerie de l'Évolution come with families. Some love books, of course, but it's more derived products such as fluffy toys that are going to be generating the most sales for the store. This is not a criticism, this is the reality. And this means that there is complementarity of the sales that we can do in generalist bookshops. So the question of distribution was important to us. We had a contract with a private distributor, and this is quite recent. The first contract was signed in 2020 with Géodif, distributed by Sodis, and we realized that this wasn't the right place for us. A little bit like Lize was saying about Interforum, we were in a catalogue of distributors, and this was like Auchan, Libre, or large cultural stores. And this wasn't the right place for us. We should have been better positioned in smaller bookshops. And so we decided not to renew our contract with Géodif when it came to an end and to choose a smaller distributor in order to be in a catalogue of publishers of a more similar scale to us. So we're at Harmonium Undilive and have been for a year or so now. We've actually had a spectacular increase in our turnover last year. And this is about the management of our collections of books as well. As we were talking about earlier, when we have new products released, we try to promote our existing products, how we can showcase some of the older ones. Perhaps they're linked to programs within our institutions and also national events. And this is also work that we're carrying out with the SMAC internally. We're lucky as an institution to have books over the long term that can link in with our programs. This is something we think about with our teams. We think about publications as a source of inspiration for cultural mediation as well. And this really is exceptional. Yes, that's great. And the same question I asked Laure, what's the proportion of digital publications for you? Is there this drive towards digital for the general public? We've decided to go for all paper for general public, and that's not the case for scientific publications, of course. Yes, that's really interesting that this choice of paper really does seem to be widespread between the four of you, and I think it's really strong. 2026, this really is excellent news, and it shows the creativity of this profession as well. And Cécile, I really liked what you said, that publications can be a source of inspiration for cultural mediation. That's what you've done with the weekend held at Louvre Studio that worked really well. I think this really is something that is interesting. So thinking about the mission, the Musée de l'Homme, the National Library of France, has a level of scientific requirement that's necessary, but also thinking of it as a vector of a policy that's as open as possible. And I think that this is very strong. So we're coming to the end of our discussions now, but not the end of our evening. We would love to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. Before handing back over to you, I really wanted to thank the four speakers of tonight. There was a real diversity. I've rarely heard a panel discussion so open, rich and varied. I'm really delighted to have heard the specifics as well. I'm really happy that we have been able to highlight the fact that there's this desire to do something to raise the profile of the institution as well, that all four have mentioned. This was a really key point with certain strong constraints as well. You've mentioned it sort of vaguely. I can say it a bit more clearly. There are human constraints. None of the departments are especially large in terms of their human capital. So all of the publishers, all of the manufacturing managers have to keep up with all of these books. There really is mental gymnastics involved in that. I congratulate you for it. It is essential. And once again, this carries something that deeply embodies our institutions, because we go where people are. We go right into the neighborhood bookshops as well, and not just in our institutions. We're embodying it because we're telling stories, and what's better than telling stories in order to talk about heritage and works of art. This isn't a conclusion. I would like to hand it over to the floor now if there are any questions online or in the room here today. I'm delighted to hear from you today. So please do just introduce yourselves for publishing purposes afterwards. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Pauline Chassin from the National Institute of Heritage. Thank you for highlighting this very important subject that we don't often talk about. So I've got a question about international issues, and I've got a little story to tell. When I travelled around different museums, I've often gone into museums and looking for the catalogue. And people sometimes laugh at me and say, it's only the French who ask me for catalogues. So I'm interested to know where France is situated amongst other European countries, because other countries must be a bit attached to this type of publication. Do you have any idea of our position within Europe, and whether my story reflects something wider? Yes, I often discuss with booksellers, not so much with publishers actually, and I think France is a bit of an exception in this matter. I think we need to thank Jacques Lang, who got this Laure voted in back in the day for this. Paris has such a wide network of booksellers. I don't understand why people buy online, because wherever you are in Paris, there is a local neighborhood bookshop. And I think this is somewhat a unique cultural feature in France. In other museums around Europe, perhaps a bit less than in Spain, the bookshops we find in France are rare. Whether you go to the UK or Germany or other countries, these museum bookshops are rarer. You do have some in Spain, but I think we have a specific culture of book publishing linked to museums. There's a lot more titles on the shelves. In terms of exhibition catalogues, I don't know. I think the big museums, even in other countries, do produce exhibition catalogues. I don't think there is a specific or unique feature. We do work quite a lot with museum catalogues in the research that we do, and I do think that most exhibitions do have a catalogue published. I don't know if museums are trying to change their formats and publish books rather than traditional catalogues. I know there's some experiments going on in the US and in Switzerland. There's some interesting things going on abroad. Perhaps it would be useful to talk about the issues of rights, about copyright. It's an important issue in terms of the business model for publishing. The sale of rights is really important for a big publishing house like GrandPalaisRmn. It's important. Even when you have traveling exhibitions, there are some books that we can sell in 4, 5 or 6 different languages with different publishers, and from a financial point of view that's quite useful. So yes, Pauline, I do agree in part with you, but when you look about the big fairs like Frankfurt and London, there is quite a lot of lifestyle. People talk about Spain, but Netherlands is another country where there's a lot of publishing in different languages. In Holland, you can find Dutch works, English language works, and French language works. So I think there's quite a variety of situations across Europe. But I do think that France has a unique book-selling culture, that's for sure. I'm going to perhaps ask a question from the chat while we're handing the microphone around. It's a question for Lize. Lize, for the Museum of Strasbourg, if you change graphic designer for each publishing project, is there a graphic design style guide that needs to be respected for each book? There are some exceptions, like the Cabinet of Amateurs collection that I showed you earlier, and some more traditional guides. There are 3 language guides for tourists, which are designed by the same graphic designers each time a new edition comes out. But the other works that we do outside of these formats, there's no particular graphic style guide at all. The idea is to work together to come up with a graphic design idea that's specific to each book, something that has quite a bold style in graphic terms. There's no particular style guide. There's no particular logos that have to be on the front cover. I suppose one thing that's a feature for us that's nothing to do with graphic design, but it's worth highlighting. People talk about the quality of reproduction, and I do want to talk about the publishing house, which is called Artisans du Regard. We have a framework agreement with this printing house, and they take real care over the quality of the print work, but also of the photographs that are used. We're very lucky to have a photo studio in-house and staff photography who can work with exhibitions and pay particular attention to the work that is published. So we try to make each work as original as possible in relation to the works of art that we want to communicate about. Does that give you a good answer to the question? Has there been an issue? No, thank you, Lize. Thank you. Thank you. Just tell us who you are. Mine's Oran Nondé. I'm from GrandPalaisRmn, or formerly in any case. Thank you for this very interesting discussion and the examples of work. I want to talk about the issue of mediation and interpretation, particularly using digital tools. The fact of using such tools in exhibitions means that our exhibitions have a greater place for writing and more digital technology. There's quite a lot of text, a lot of digital items, as I was saying. Do you think that augmented reality and QR codes and things like that, are you having to deal with them in your publishing as well? The second question, you talk about co-publishing and co-production. In this light, we need to think in terms of international collaborations, perhaps more boldly. I work quite a bit across the world, and big international museums do work very hard to publish beautiful books. Museums in China, in Japan, in Scandinavia, in the US, all of these big museums do a lot of publishing work. Firstly, I'll perhaps answer your first question. When we work with exhibition curators, we work quite closely with them. As I said, at the Museum of Natural History, exhibitions are not put together by scientific experts, but rather by our exhibition department, and we have some input from scientists, sometimes from external curators and commissaires as well. So this little exhibition committee will work with the digital content as well. The audiovisual content fits in with the scientific realities behind research, and we do the same type of work as well for our books. The fact that scientific content has been adapted for audiovisual doesn't mean it will necessarily include that in our book. We might think, what is the key striking fact that needs to be communicated in a book? It's not necessarily the same kind of thinking when you design an audiovisual exhibition as when you publish a book. It will need to be adapted. But we do have the same process, working closely with the scientists in the same way that the exhibition curators do. Something I would add is that we work quite a bit with our scenographers and the exhibition department, who show their exhibition design in order to help us understand the intentions behind the exhibition. So when there are digital displays or devices that might be a bit innovative, we try to understand what they're trying to do, and we try and find something in our books that show what's going on. So if there's an immersive exhibition item, this immersive aspect, we try to recreate it in a book. The book is obviously not the same as an exhibition, but we do try to seek a similar effect, a similar immersive effect. For example, in autumn, we're going to be publishing a young person's book. The author is still alive, and we got her in to do a reading. She had such a great voice, and we tried to record her voice, and we are going to enable it to be listened to by the readers of the book using a QR code. It's not something artificial. We've added in the voice, and so it is a kind of augmented edition of the book, and so that's the kind of audiovisual technology we're using. In our experience, we're not using QR codes at the moment because there's an issue around maintaining the code, maintaining the web site. So we don't know that the online content is going to be lasting online in the same way that a book is lasting. while we hand around the mic, I've got another question in the chat. To what extent and how do you cover issues of shared responsibility, and when books aren't sold, how do you share that risk? I can speak for the Museum of Natural History. These issues of sustainable development are really important to the institution. We've got a sustainability department which pays a lot of attention to these issues and asks us what means of transport visitors have used to get to the museums, just to say that they really look into those questions. But in terms of our works, what we try to do is to have a thought through management system. We think about the type of paper we use in making the books, but we know that if we want to be really sustainable, it would mean producing less books or producing none at all. That's not actually what we're going for. We're trying to have a more reasonable or reasoned management system. So we try to adjust the print run in accordance with demand. We might have to reprint, but we try to avoid overstocking or overproducing our books. We generally don't publish more than a dozen books per year from our publishing house. So when we see that we're a bit overstocked, and that happened when we changed our distribution model, you obviously have to review your inventories, and you say, unfortunately, these books didn't hit the mark with the audience. We maybe printed a bit too much. So we always try to think about environmentally friendly solutions. So we reduced our inventories when we changed our distribution methods. But after the earthquake in Mayotte, we had an appeal to restock libraries, and so we sent some of our old stocks, some of the stocks that we hadn't been able to sell at that time. So we try to have a healthy, virtuous approach and not hold on to a dead inventory. Thank you, Dominique. My name is Paul Lang. I'm the predecessor of Émilie at the Museum of Strasbourg. I've got a very down-to-earth question. I'm sorry about that. Dominique reminded us about the role of the publishing department within a museum. You talked about it being a profit centre and a cost centre. At the start of my career, back 40 years ago, statistics told us that 5% of visitors bought the exhibition catalogue, 5% only. I would like to know what that figure is now. I've been working with Vanessa Van Esbroek on a project with the Museum of Houston, and they felt that it was 1% of visitors buying the catalogue. So I hope that in France we haven't dropped from 5 to 1%. I don't know what the situation is in Switzerland or in Canada, but in the years where I was responsible for this, we felt that the figure would be 5%. In Strasbourg, I imagine Émilie is doing a lot better than me, but even with a figure of 5%, I often had difficult conversations with my overseeing ministries and the financial departments. I imagine that Émilie does a lot better than me. She's probably a bit more diplomatic, maybe a bit firmer than I was, and it is a reality. But I think that is a contextual element that's important. Publishing activities within a museum, particularly in regional museums, are not that easy. They don't go without saying, and that's true internationally as well.
I can give you some statistics, but all books are different. I'm not sure that I calculate it the same way that you do. I take the number of visitors and I divide this by the number of catalogues sold, and this makes me one catalogue per certain number of visitors. That's my calculation method. It really does vary depending on the exhibition, depending on the site. When we have French visitors, this rate can be at 1 every 25 or 30 visitors. There can be some exceptions. I think we had 1 every 9 visitors for one exhibition. That was really exceptional. And there are differences as well if there are monographies that often have a higher rate than those on artistic movements. We generally go from 1 to every 30 to 80 visitors. If we go beyond that, and it can happen, as a bookshop, we could have 1 every 300 visitors. I can't remember the I'm not going to tell you the name of the artist, but there wasn't the name of the artist on the title of the catalogue, and the work that was on the front cover was not in the exhibition. We could write an exhibition catalogue as big as we liked, but we only had 1 every 250 people. It really depends on the price as well. We are really happy if it's 1 in 40. Beyond 1 in 80, it's a bit difficult. Yes, this is a really key question with some big differences and some surprises as well. The last catalogue at GrandPalaisRmn really sold well. We weren't expecting this, as it was quite a long book. It was a surprise. One point that we did not mention that's also essential is that if exhibition catalogues are going well, the children's materials as well, there's a bigger question, and it's difficult to defend this in all of our institutions. But there can be publications for symposiums. It's more and more difficult to publish for these. And this is what helps us to communicate knowledge, but it's really difficult to do. People say, do this in digital form. It's a real joke. This requires as much cost and as much work as if we're printing, more or less. We're really struggling. And I don't want to finish on a negative note, but as a curator and an author, I'm really frustrated at this. It means that our symposiums and conferences do not have any publishing. Some speakers make less of an effort than they would have done if it was published. If they're just talking to 250 or 300 people, they can recycle a talk that they've already done elsewhere. I'm not targeting anybody in particular, but I know that this exists, and this isn't the case if there is a public publication. This is a debate that I'm very passionate about. We're going to be doing it at the Festival of Art at Saint-Angoul on Friday, on the 5th of January, where we're going to be talking about journals, scientific journals that are very important publications. I am very happy that they are renewing 4814, this review journal. There's Valérie Coudin as well, maintaining Grand Galerie, which is a magazine and a journal that is doing really well. So I know you're sat in front of me. I'm not just saying it because you are sat there, but just more generally. And I think that there really is an issue here, because we could risk losing a lot with the absence of this kind of publication. MNHN supports us, but we have relative weakness, and it is important to consider this, as we have small print runs, but they can be really beautiful print runs. And this is what is building the future. Without this, it's not going to be possible. So I would love to see you at the Festival of Art in June, on the 5th of June, and we can talk about this. I don't know if there are any other questions, Émilie? Yes, to go back to Paul's question, Lize, would you like to say something about the rates more generally? Yes, Paul, we had an amazing idea after you left. Sorry, it was a bit late. Without going into the details, we had to justify title by title of the sales price to our supervisory ministry when Paul was director, and this was not simple, because our officials were not necessarily familiar with the book chain. We had to pay for a distributor, a bookstore, and an author, so the price needed to reflect this. They felt that they were too expensive, so not so accessible enough for visitors, but at the same time, it was not generating enough money. And they said, well, just sell the digital version, but actually that would deprive us of 50% of the income. So I know that it was not easy for Paul, but recently we've changed our angle of attack. We reason as classic publishers do in an annual income. We've proposed categories of pricing with categories of budgets. So for a budget that costs us this amount, I don't know, between 10 and 20,000, we have a sales price of around €9. We have price categories like that, which mean that we no longer have to justify sales prices title by title. And it would appear that it's been validated. It was slightly under the radar. But to go back to what Cécile was saying, when we examine income, in terms of the number of books sold, we are higher in bookshops, and income generated is about balanced between the bookshops and on site. And we are able to balance our budgets and income. That's not including HR fees, so it's not a true operating profit. But at our level, with this niche phenomenon that I mentioned earlier, I think that this is something that we could defend. It's honorable for our missions, which are missions for documentation, scientific missions, and missions to communicate on our activities as well. So that's what we're trying to defend. People receive it with varying levels of kindness, perhaps, but this is our position. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you very much, Lize. Are there any other questions in the room? Good evening. I'm Virginie. I was head of publishing for the general public at Muséum many years ago. I would just like to say that I'm delighted to see the work that Cécile has been doing. I wanted to ask questions about the relationship with private publishers that contact the institution about projects that they are initiating. I know that they sometimes want to draw on the richness of our collections, or they can provide know-how that museums and other institutions don't always have. So this is a question for all of you. So I'm going to answer for the museum. I can talk about co-publishing. I was not able to talk about that previously. And this is an important proportion of our publications. It is common that a private publisher comes to us because they have an idea of a topic or because they have identified a book that we have in our collections. I don't know. And we often try to think about co-publishing as something virtuous. We know that it will be the opportunity to align ourselves with a publisher that might have greater resources than we do, and sometimes know-how that we don't have as well. But in any case, we always ask the question about why we are co-publishing this book. It's not an automatic thing. It's not a way of making savings for us. We want to think about why we wouldn't do that book, what the added value is. So let me give you a couple of examples. The first is a book that we did a few years ago now in 2019, Museum Pop-Up. We did this in co-publishing with GrandPalaisRmn, which is a children's publisher specialized in pop-up books. They have a very unique know-how that we would not have been able to do alone. This is a book that works really well, because we were talking about exports earlier. This has been sold in multiple languages, and we reprint it almost every year because it works really well. And another book that we did as co-publishing, which we wouldn't have done alone, was with Marabout, called 4 saisons au jardin, 4 seasons in the garden. And it was about promoting the know-how of gardeners at the museum. As you know, Anne, there are lots of botanical gardens, and we were contacted to do some books about gardening, and we co-developed this product together. how can we promote botanical knowledge with the teams working every day with these very ancient plants. We've got some that are more than 100 years old, so we were able to promote this in a book of advice. It's a practical book and also a book of fine knowledge. So we've got this virtuous biotope here, and we do consider co-publishing as a source of income. Marabout has a lot of strength in the industry. And so, yes, this book brought us a lot of money. That is significant. But it's also a way of working differently and to do books that we would not have had the opportunity to do otherwise. Yes, we also still work with co-publishing. We have a tool to work alone, but we also work in co-publishing as well. It's very interesting. This is an exhibition catalogue. Normally we do that alone, but here we worked with Gallimard because we wanted to work on Colette with the publisher of the author. But some publishers come to see us, and we also contact some publishers. If an author is with a publisher, it would seem normal to ask them if they're interested. It's in both of our interest to work together on this in their catalogue and in our own. We're able to integrate the best book possible on the topic. At the same time, we have two co-published collections with a historic publisher called Perreau. We would not be able to do this alone because it's a publisher of history, which means that we are able to produce this kind of book. And in comic strips, 2024 is a Strasbourg-based publisher. They've developed a catalogue. This is a comic strip catalogue that works in an experimental way in this field. We think that 2024 would be able to bring more than if we were doing it alone. Our co-publishing projects are really precious. We know our catalogues, we know our strengths. So we try to ally ourselves with these people. Excellent. Well, I think that we can say that it was an excellent evening. I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank ICOM for their confidence. Thank you, Émilie and Claude, and the entire team. I would also like to thank GrandPalaisRmn INP as well. Thank you for your support in this project. Thank you for all of you for staying late in Paris and behind your screens at home. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, taking notes of this event, and thanks to whom we will be able to have publications. It is thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we are able to publish these smaller books available free of charge and online on the ICOM website. And under the presidency of Émilie, has really intensified what the previous president, Juliette Raoul-Duval, did as well. There is this desire to maintain a commitment to publishing and scientific knowledge. And I think that it really does distinguish ICOM France, and I am delighted to be a partner with you. So thank you very much for your work. On that note, I encourage you to continue to read, to write, to publish. I said it earlier, but I will say it again. This is a natural means of expression for museums, for libraries. Visit galleries, but visit books as well. And perhaps you will be able to discover all of these hidden paths in our books. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.